We are here today with Maria Luisa Gorno Tempini, Marilù, a behavioral neurologist and professor of neurology and psychiatry at University of California, San Francisco. Grazie for telling us your ISSNAF story, Marilù.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the science. What is behavioral neurology?
Yes, so neurology is the discipline of medicine and of neuroscience, I think, that relates to studying and caring for disorders of the nervous system. And then if you think that we have a central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system, so the central nervous system is basically the brain, and the nervous system we can simply say are the nerves and how they connect to the muscles. What behavioral neurology is the branch of neurology or clinical neuroscience that has to do with the brain. So anything that has to do with brain health across the lifespan, brain development, brain response to diseases like stroke or neurodegenerative diseases or trauma or tumors, and but also healthy aging and healthy development, or atypical aging or atypical development. And if we think that the brain is the basis of every aspect of human behavior, from language to memory to empathy to emotions, then behavioral neurology becomes really the branch of medicine that has to do with human thought process and behavior. Yes, so very linked to psychiatry as well. So we have the distinction between psychiatry and neurology is becoming more and more blurred, as we have learned through the years that also mood and affect and emotions are coming from specific processes of the brain. So here at UCSF, we have now an Institute of the Neurosciences that include both psychiatry and neurology.
And you have a doctorate in neuroimaging of language from University College London. So what is neuroimaging of language?
Yes, so the overall theme of the PhD was cognitive neuroscience. So cognitive neuroscience is, again, a specific branch of neurology and neuroscience that has to do more with cognition, what we call cognition compared to behavior. So cognition is really the more specific functioning and functions of the brain. We think about memory, visual spatial functioning, and language. And so language is the most human of the cognitive functions. And so for me, it's always been a tool to study how thought emerges from the brain. How does an electrical signal in specific parts of the brain results in us producing or understanding words and sentences and communicating our intentions. And one of the specific technical tools that we've had in the past decades is imaging, and MRIs and PETs and EEG, all sorts of MEG, all sorts of different tools that get us to see how the brain operates to create these behaviors and cognitive functions. So it's really a tool that is evolving over time.
Okay, so now that we understand these concepts, can you tell us about your current research and clinical work at the Language Neurobiology Laboratory at UCSF, of which you are the director, and at the UCSF Dyslexia Center that you co-founded and co-direct?
Yes, so this is the novelty of our center, I think, is to really have a lifespan approach. So there's been, like the silo that we talked about between neurology and psychiatry, there's been silos about child neurology, child psychiatry, and adult neurology, adult psychiatry. Because of course, in everyday life, the issues and the problems that we might want to try to solve in childhood versus adulthood might be different. But the underlying biology is very linked. The way the brain develops will influence the way that the brain ages. And the way the brain has developed will influence how someone recovers from stroke, or at what age a neurodegenerative process that has been happening in the brain for many, many years will start causing symptoms. And we've never really made this link before. It was very separate. And what we saw is really that the way that the brain develops, so if someone has some brain diversity in development, dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADHD, or even being on the autism spectrum, will then influence how one reacts to disorders or conditions of adulthood. And this created a link and made a possible the creation of a dyslexia center within an aging center, and really looking at these conditions that caused differences in thoughts and cognitive and behavioral processes across the lifespan. And so that's why this unusual situation in which a dyslexia and cognitive diversity center is within a memory and aging center, because really we want to look at the whole lifespan. The work of the Dyslexia Center is particularly current and relevant now, especially in California, because California is one of the few states in the US that doesn't mandate early screening for dyslexia in elementary schools. So we're talking about what in Italy would be even the scuola materna. So in kindergarten and in first grade, we can have some signs that a child might be at risk for reading, or I think also math and behavioral issues. And so the legislature is now discussing whether to mandate this type of screening. And so the work can have really become an implementation science project, which is something that I'm really excited about. So that science and translation and implementation can happen together more smoothly than in the past.
Why did you become interested in neurology? And please tell us about that also in the context of where in Italy you grew up and your studies.
Yes, so I don't know why I've always been interested in the brain. I think I'm realizing that many women and young women and girls are interested in this. I don't know if it's because we are expected to be so responsive to other people's needs and we want to understand them better, or what it is. I'm really puzzled by the fact that so many girls go into psychology. And so I also debated whether to go the medicine or the psychology route. And then I decided being more biologically oriented, despite having done a liceo classico. And I really wanted to go more towards the mechanisms and like what at the cellular, molecular, genetic, neuron level in the brain, where are the behaviors coming from? So I was lucky enough to have, once I decided to go the medicine route instead of the psychology route, and in Brescia, in my hometown, the head of neurology in Brescia were really some of the pioneers of neuropsychology and cognitive neurology at the time in which not many tools were required. It was about observation of behavior and testing patients on what they could do, how many words they could come up with, how many, whether they would respond normally to recognizing faces with different expressions. So it wasn't, it did not require much funding. It was really human intuition and intelligence. And I was exposed to that very early. And so took that path of studying language. And then the professor, Stefano Cappa in Brescia, sent me to do 1 year of my, I guess I moved to residency in Modena, where also were some of the pioneers in behavioral neurology in Italy. And then I spent a year in London and went there to do my PhD, and that was it. And then
and when did you move to North America? When did you move to the States?
Yeah, so when I finished my PhD, when I finished being professional student, as my family would say. It was a time to decide whether I wanted to go back in Italy or continue kind of more of a learning adventure side. And my partner at the moment moved to San Francisco, and I wrote an email to the professor in San Francisco who was studying this condition, frontotemporal dementia and progressive aphasia, that I was interested in. And he replied in like 2 hours, and he said, yes, come as well, do a postdoc. And so a 2-year postdoc turned into a 22 years life-changing experience.
What can you tell us about your experience as a woman in science? So what were and are the major challenges that you had to face?
It's an interesting and painful question sometimes. And what I've learned through the years is that many times when you're in a situation, you don't even realize the biases that are at play against you, that it takes time to process them that way. And that it really depends on the environment in which one is and has. And to me, changing environments has been super useful to realize the strengths and weaknesses of every place where I've been, you know, training in Italy and then training in the UK. And then really my first years here in California were also of training on these new diseases and conditions that I was studying and treating. So every place has different biases. I think every group who's a minority in any field faces challenges. And I think in medical school, I was not a minority. But when I started going to more technical PhDs and in the both science career, you do become a minority, and that includes a lot of extra work. I think that's mainly, you know, a lot of extra work on trying to fit in and trying to be listened to and trying to be appreciated. And I think that's been the main difference that I found here compared to both Italy and the UK. And this opportunity of being listened to and treated the same and really fitting into an environment where there is more diversity. Is not just gender or sex-based diversity, it's racial, it's cultural, it's religious. Then it's easier to fit in when there is a larger pool of diversity and everybody's trying to work together and trying to understand everybody else's issues. So that's what's been really incredible for me here. And also the possibility of doing clinical science. So both combining seeing patients and caring for patients and doing research on the same conditions. So from a job point of view, that's the most fulfilling and unique opportunities that we have here in the US compared to Italy or the UK, in which if you're a clinician, it's very hard to find also the time, the time to teach and then the time to care for patients and the time to do research. The careers in Italy are not very well defined. So if you are faculty in a neurology department, academic neurology department in Italy, you're supposed to do all three at the same level. And it's really, really difficult. While
So
here you can differentiate.
Sorry. What piece of advice would you give a young Italian woman in your field?
Oh boy. Well, I think the advice is to really choose something that you're passionate about and you're really willing to work hard for, and find the right mentorship and find the right sponsorship and stick with it and get experiences elsewhere and try to not stay in the same place for more than a few years, because otherwise the mechanisms get really stuck. So gain experience and then maybe go back, but it does take some resilience. So having a really strong passion and mission can help with that resilience, and seek mentorship and sponsorship. That's what I would.
Can you comment on your professional ties with Italy and on the scientific collaborations in general between Italy and North America in your field? What do you think are the most successful initiatives and major challenges?
I've had very successful collaborations and exchanges of trainees and fellows and scholars from Italy to the US. And I still have a lot of ties and collaborations with students that are now all over Italy, and try to support them and sponsor them, as we said, as much as I can, especially women scientists and clinicians. There've been over the years I think a lot of the motor behind science is funding. And so I think the more we can promote initiatives that fund collaborations, I've seen that it's been super successful here to create collaborations between disciplines, between institutions. Okay, these are grants that you can only apply if you're working together and you're bringing expertise and exchange from different countries and institutions. So I think that can be very helpful. And for instance, if you think about, disorders of the brain that manifest as language issues, only 40% of the world population speaks Indo-European languages. We need to study, and every language has a different structure. It's written in a different way, it's pronounced in a different ways, the rule grammars are different. There are some common structures, but then there are differences. So diseases that hit the same networks in the brain can manifest in a different way if a person speaks Chinese or Italian or English. And
I saw a paper you wrote about comparing Italian and English speakers for dyslexia, I believe.
For progressive aphasia. Yeah, that's been a very fruitful decades-long collaboration with the San Raffaele University in Milan, and that's been really great. We created some tests that were applicable in both languages, and then compared patients, and it was really important to show, because the criteria for these diseases, the clinical criteria for diagnosis, are written for patients who speak English mainly, but they can look different in Italian for many different ways. So I think that kind of research spurred a whole new round of funding at NIH that we've applied for, to bring together a cohort of patients from different countries. So this is an example, and genetics is another example, right? Like for genetic research, it's very important to have samples from different countries, different racial background, and we're realizing that more and more. So international collaborations are going to be more and more important.
The Italian diaspora, is it only a brain drain for Italy, or do we contribute to Italian society, and if so, how?
My close friends and family know that I've had this neuroticism for the past 22 years. Do I stay or do I go? Do I go back or do I stay? And it's another layer of kind of conflict between being an immigrant and how painful that is to be far from one's country and one's family and long-term friends. It is a loss. It's a big loss, and I deal with it every day. So there are certain periods of life in which it's more difficult than others. Newborn children, aging parents. Sometimes it seems to people who stay that we kind of go on a long vacation, and that's really not the case. It's really not the case. I'm always happy to go back to Italy. This is something I negotiated since the beginning, that I would spend at least a month in the summer with close to my family in Italy, and I've stuck to that through the 22 years. And I still think it's the country with the best quality of life in the world. And
so
the best
then, as a last question, yes, what do you most enjoy when you go back to Italy?
Well, you know, some of the usual things like the food and the weather and the Mediterranean Sea. I always say that I need at least 2 weeks a year by the Mediterranean Sea for my health. And I miss the people. I miss having fun just going to a bar to get a cafe and chatting with the person who's making my cafe. You know, here you can go to the same Starbucks for 5 years and still not having exchanged a couple words with the person on the other side. So I love the energy and the entrepreneurship and the sense of you can do anything that you have here, and it's true. But I always miss the warmth and the joy of life and the social interactions that we have in Italy.
Just yesterday in her ISSNAF story, Professor Maria Grazia Roncarolo mentioned the cappuccino in Italy.
Yeah, I think it's all that goes around it, you know?
Yeah.
It's like people willing to have dinner last minute. There is a value that we in Italy give to social interactions and warmth and sharing experiences that I think is very unique. And maybe is our strength and our weakness at the same time. Because everything becomes social. It becomes, I don't know, but that's what I really miss, that kind of sharing, that closeness that we feel in Italy by the moment you step out of the airport.
So we'll have to keep going back and forth. That's what you're suggesting.
I think so. I think that has been my final decision after decades of trying to go back, is that I'm here, I'm American, I'm Italian, and I need to spend not quite 50-50, but almost. At least that would be the goal for my future. Now is not 50-50 because of where my career is, but I've kind of given up the idea of going back stably, but not given up the idea of being Italian and spending some of my time and my energy and my work also there.
Grazie mille, Marilù.
Grazie mille a te.